Maxey, and I had the pleasure of managing the Los Angeles Zoo's California Condor Recovery Program for a number of years. The Los Angeles Zoo has been instrumental in the success of the California Condor's recovery. Modern captive breeding techniques, artificial incubation, and chick handling protocols initiated by the LA Zoo have become a staple of the current U.S. Fish and Wildlife protocols. Mike Clark was the architect of many of these changes. His 35 years of experience working with these majestic birds and his passionate dedication to the conservation at the zoo and in the field makes him a leading authority for this landmark species. I'm proud to introduce Mike Clark.
Oh, shucks.
And I'm supposed to mention, hold all questions till the end of his talk.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody, for having me, and thanks for inviting me. Friends of the California Condors, Wild and Free. It's an honor to be here to speak to you guys. My name is Mike Clark, and I call this Gifts of the Condor. And the reason I call it Gifts of the Condor is because, you know, we dedicated our lives to this program, but we got a lot back in return. In 1989, I was hired at the LA Zoo, and I spent the next 35 years propagating one of the world's most endangered birds, the California Condor. Back in 1989, there were a total of 30 birds in the world. Just 2 years earlier, the last wild bird was trapped and brought into captivity for its own protection. The LA Zoo had produced a couple eggs in 1988 before I got there, but none of them had been hatched or reared there. So apart from the most recent breeding season of 2025, I had a hand in incubating, hatching every egg and rearing of every chick produced at the Los Angeles Zoo until my retirement in November 2024. A lot could be learned by doing this for so long. Now, what does it mean to breed a California condor? What is a condor? The largest land bird in North America, the California condor soars on an impressive 9.5-foot wingspan, but we already knew that. An obligate scavenger, soaring is an efficient way to cover long distances with the least amount of energy expenditure. Why do they need to conserve energy? Because their food source, carrion, is not a very predictable one. So they're moving around the landscape and keeping an eye out for any other scavengers on the land surface that have discovered anything. They need to be in the know of what's happening in the environment so that they can take advantage of any of the unpredictable opportunities. And when they do happen upon an opportunity, this is their favorite pastime. Large carcasses, the bigger the better. Range cattle, elk, horse, deer, feral pigs, sheep, or on the coast, marine mammals like whales, dolphins, and sea lions. They have adaptations for rendering such large food sources. Let's take a look at Malibu, condor number 43, a female. Mostly bald head and neck because of how they make their living eating dead things, sanitary reasons. Jamming your head and neck shoulder deep in a slimy, rotting cow carcass can be pretty messy. If you had a head and neck covered in feathers, like, say, an eagle, you can imagine how hard that would be to get that cleaned off after every meal. The wet skin and a nice bask in the sun is all it takes to flake away any soiling. With all that exposed skin, there is good opportunity to use it for social cues and communication. Skin on the neck and face is very important for California condors' social interactions. This area is in a large way where they wear their emotions. The skin on the neck and face is constantly changing with their thoughts and emotions. Not just shape, but color and color intensity. You can sometimes see the skin changing and moving when they are asleep, like a dog that's dreaming. Malibu is a particularly attractive female condor with lots of color and a full adult. In this picture, her face and neck are fairly smooth, and her neck and under the jaw is mostly inflated. Not too many wrinkles. Is there a pointer? I didn't.
No, we don't have one, sorry.
Okay. No biggie. Now pay attention to the next few slides. The feathery ring around the condor's neck is called the ruff. Pay attention to the ruff on this adult male, Kauai, condor number 42. Notice a little bit of wrinkling on the front of the neck and maybe even around the mouth opening. And the ruff is starting to rise a bit in the front of the neck. Now you see a different level of elevated ruff. You can really see the neck. You can't really see the neck anymore. The ruff of this bird can move up and down the neck at will. This can be emotional expression, or it can simply be for thermoregulation. This bird was in a flight pen in Baja in the winter at 8,000 feet elevation. So I know from the context of this, he was thermoregulating with his ruff. Also, he has a relaxed almond-shaped eye, showing that he is emotionally relaxed. If he was agitated, the orange sclera at the back of the eye would be more visible. I'd give you a pointer, but I don't have one. At the very back side of his eye, when a bird is relaxed, it's all covered up, but when they become more agitated, the whole back of the eye moves back, and you see this real bright orange sort of ring. If he was agitated, the orange, after this slide, I have a good animated example of emotion, courtesy of an old friend by the name of Mandan, who was just asked about earlier, Condor number 46, a 35-year-old male I've been taking care of for 35 years. Look at Mandan's ruff. It's all the way up to his ears. Context is everything with condors. What is the context of this behavior right now? The context here is that I was in his personal space with my video camera, and he was a little concerned. He was waiting for me to feed him, so that's why he hung around. But that's the context. And see how wrinkly it is underneath. See how wrinkled it is? Now the next video is of the same bird about 2 minutes later. The neck is completely exposed. You can see in real time the skin on his neck going from wrinkled to smooth and back again with his emotional state. This may seem novel, like what does it matter? But when your job is to be sure your breeders are happy and live a life that's fulfilled in a captive situation so that they are willing to make more condors, it is very important information to pay attention to. Sexes are very similar, but there is some sexual dimorphism. Males are generally larger and broader. They have deeper set eyes and bonier heads and larger feet. Hens have a softer look in their eyes. Males appear to me to have longer necks than females. Most of the way to tell is behavioral, though, postures and the way they walk around. Males are around 19 to 25 pounds. Females are about 17 to 20 pounds on average. A trained eye can tell the difference even with juveniles. My last year at the zoo, I was about 95% correct at telling the sexes of freshly hatched chicks. Just lucky, I guess. How long do they live? No one really knows. There are records from zoos around the world of male Andean condors breeding into their 80s. For now, we have one example. A yearling juvenile male was found down and out in Matilaha Canyon near Ojai in 1967, brought into the zoo for rehabilitation and hopefully re-released. The release attempts failed, and he became a permanent resident of the LA Zoo. He was named Topa Topa, Condor number 1, and he would be the only California condor in captivity for about the next 15 years. There's Topa in 2007 at 40 years. Big bird. Topa has weighed in at 27 pounds at times. Topa was on exhibit in the zoo for many years starting in the 70s, eventually taken off exhibit for the breeding program in the mid-80s. Topa hadn't seen another condor since he was in the wild 20 years prior. He habituated to his keepers who hand-fed him and played with him, etc. No one knew how important he would become in the later years. Nobody knew there was going to be a breeding program. They just had a bird. Those keepers. A social, gregarious species, aggression is part of their language, the ever yearning to advance their hierarchy. They can also become pair bonded to their caretakers, like other bird species in captivity, like parrots. Aggression towards humans can be a management issue for husbandry. Not only was he aggressive towards people, he was intimidated by other condors. Here we have an extremely important genetic bank in this single individual, but because he is so socially awkward, we can't get him to breed with any females because he is mal-socialized. Back on the longevity subject, this video was taken in September of 2024, just before I retired. Topa has had another birthday since then, so he is now 59 years old. Whenever I had to go in with him over the years, I would always hear this music in my head. Can you hear it? Anyway, someone would say, yeah, it's just a bird. What are you scared of? He probably wouldn't even do anything, would he? The short answer is yes. He could be quite dangerous because of his lack of fear of humans. Cleaning pools, general maintenance, retrieving eggs or chicks, all these tasks could get you cornered. Eventually, we learned what Topa liked and didn't like, so we learned to manage him without too much problems. And when I say manage him, I mean it was usually me who was sent in to deal with him. Here's Topa with his longtime mate Malibu from the earlier slide. Again, here's an example of two different emotional states. Topa's neck is fully visible. He's smooth and inflated, where the hen behind him is deflated with her ruff raised with a bit of anxiety. Malibu was intimidated by humans, Topa not so much. Now, here's the age progression drawing by the great naturalist and master artist John Schmidt, showing the age progression in a bird. The top one is a yearling bird, and the bottom one is a full adult with full adult plumage, colors, and beak shade of white. You can see all the other shades, subadults, their beaks are dark colored. This drawing is great, but these are general guidelines. Not every bird ages the same way. And I don't know if anybody's seen, Stacy knows, Dolly from the zoo. We raised that bird, and it had a lot of trauma in its life. It broke its wing and stuff, and we kept it for a outreach bird. And people would come to the zoo and go, "Oh, what is that thing? 4 years old?" And we're all, "No, it's 9," because it would age so slowly. So they all age differently. It has been observed multiple times that a group of same-aged juveniles kept together will mature in their facial color according to hierarchy. The most dominant bird will show signs of advanced maturity before the rest. I took this interesting picture of a 3-year-old female and a 4-year-old male when they were in for lead poisoning treatment. How can you tell a male at this age, or a female? We talked earlier about the softer eye of the female and almost doe-eyed. The deeper set, angrier looking eye of the male. Males also have looser skin under the lower jaw. Females don't really have much extra skin there, especially at this age. So what are you looking at there? The top one is what? Female. See, you can tell the difference. Anybody can. Another interesting shot of a 3 or 4-year-old, very content and relaxed, inflated, and pretty smooth skin on the neck. I'm guessing a male with all that loose skin below the jaw. Now, the last time I ran through this talk one time before this, and I wasn't able to get through the next slide without crying. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the core team that I spent more than half my life working alongside of. Pictured here is myself, Jenny Williams, Debbie Sears, Chandra David. You're looking at about 115 years of combined condor propagation and husbandry experience. Not just expertise, but Condor program experience. That's a big table right there. Our belief was that no matter who was signing our checks, we were employees of the Condor Recovery Program. We had allegiance to the birds and no one else. This wasn't always popular with our institution and confused a lot of our colleagues at other institutions because we never saw anything as a competition. As far as we were concerned, we were all in this together. Us and all of our entity partners are working on the program. We like to think it rubbed off on a lot of them because we are all one big extended family to this day. We have been through it all, the good, the bad, the terrible, endless days, nights, years, decades, and we are family. We leaned on each other through every triumph and every gut-wrenching disaster and loss. Significant others, marriages, divorces, and we couldn't have done it without each other. This presentation is dedicated to them. Last but not least, the fool who hired me and mentored me and befriended me, Dr. Mike Wallace. Mike Wallace was the California Condor Recovery Team leader for many years. He was my boss as curator of birds at the LA Zoo from my hire in 1989 to 1999, when he moved to the San Diego Wild Animal Park, where he launched the Baja Condor Release Project from there. To say this man was brilliant would be an understatement. He was a genius. Mike steered the Condor program for decades. He was very innovative and resourceful and extremely politically savvy. The way he navigated his way through unbelievable political red tape and roadblocks for the advancement of the program was nothing short of masterful. The patagial tags you see on the bird's wings today were his design, as well as the transmitter attachment. But those were just a couple of the things he innovated. He identified almost every release site in the program for its suitability for young birds to start their lives in the wild. Mike almost never used the word can't. Quote, "We just have to find a way," he would say. Mike gave us all so many lessons, not just for the birds, but for life. Whenever we ran into an insurmountable problem and exhausted all options, we would say, "What would Wallace do?" And we would be reinvigorated. Mike would say, "Train everyone like you're leaving the program in a year." And that's exactly what he did for us. Mike and I became close friends all the way up until his passing a few years ago. In my opinion, the Condor program would be decades behind what it is now if he had not been steering it and had been so daring and progressive with its direction. R.I.P. Mike Wallace. And I don't mean to leave Mike Maxey, the guy who left me out, but he was my boss too. And he was a big part of why we were successful. So enough about everyone else. Let's talk about me for a second. This bird obsession thing goes back, way back. I was into birds for as long as I could remember. I couldn't get enough of them. Parrots, chickens, pigeons, ducks, turkeys, I had them all. I started focusing on raptors at a young age and hoped to fly birds as a falconer one day. I raised every local wild bird and raptor I could get my hands on, to the dismay of my dad. I eventually got my wish and started flying birds legally and got my falconry license and started training wild raptors to hunt with me. As I got more experience, I tried different species and met a lot of people, like Mike Maxey, doing the same pastime. Another Ferruginous hawk. One of my favorite birds to date was this Verreaux's eagle from Africa. But my main squeeze over the last 2 decades is this female golden eagle. Her name is Betty. She is 17 years old now. I acquired her in 2008. You guys like videos of eagles hunting? Thought you'd never ask. Betty has her own Instagram page, so I'll give you a second to take a picture of the screen so you can look at it later. I included this picture because I thought it was significant because of the timestamp on it, November 24th, 1989. At this time, I had been at the zoo for barely a month. 24 years old, with my falconry license, working for a big conservation program, I probably thought I was pretty important. I learned very quickly that politics and ego would only hinder me, and only 100% dedication to the birds would help. LA City politics imagined competition with other partners, being critical of others, bad blood and animosity in such a critical situation was just not helpful. If it didn't benefit the birds, then don't do it. When I first started part-time at the zoo, the city of LA was in a hiring freeze, and they almost always are. And through Wallace's political finagling, I was able to get an additional part-time job there. One was animal keeper through the city, and the other was a completely made-up position called Condor Facility Maintenance through a grant program, environmental license plate program. I was essentially doing the same job, and the Condor department had some additional staff without really paying for it. I got 2 paychecks, and I had 0 benefits. The original Condor facility, built in 1980, was fully functional and had birds in it. The new East facility was in the final phases of construction, and Wallace wanted it open and running by Thanksgiving, so we could possibly have breeding there by the next spring. We only had a month. Talk about trial by fire. There was so much work still to be done, and just a couple of keepers to do it all and take care of the condors we already had. My first tasks, I remember, were carrying 9-foot railroad ties on my shoulder all over the property, chainsawing them to size for terracing, construction site cleanup, getting the cages ready to hold the birds. All the while, I was expected to sit and observe birds, take notes, and try to learn all about them. The facilities are huge, as you can imagine. Here is a partial shot of the original condominiums, as they were called back in the 80s when they were first constructed. We just call it Condors West. Once the new East facility was finished, we moved in all the new pairs. At that point, all construction activity and noise around the facility was brought to a halt. We were in the blinds all day, observing, taking copious amounts of notes, looking for pair bonding, and since we hadn't got the security alarm systems installed yet, we also took turns spending the nights there, keeping an eye on our precious condors. At the time, there were only 30 birds in the world, and we had half of them, and the other half were in San Diego. Much of what is known about breeding condors was adopted from the successful efforts of zoos propagating Andean condors. Observing the condors every day, I began to have favorite birds. At that time, my favorite pair was AC9 and Squapuni. AC9 was the last condor trapped in 1987, so he was pretty significant. Andean condors are the only other condor species in the world. As you can see, they are quite different, and they have an impressive 11-foot wingspan. This is a very, very big bird species and lives in South America. Largest flying bird in the world. I tried to put together a crappy little comparison of the size of a California condor and an Andean condor. Andean condors exhibit an obvious sexual dimorphism, not so much like California condors, are very similar. Males are much larger than females and have a fleshy carbuncle or comb on their heads. Males can weigh 30 pounds. Males have an amber-colored eye. Females are similar in size to California condors and have a blood red eye, much like a California condor does. Juvenile plumage in California condors is black, but in this species is overall brown. Very different than juvenile California condors. In fact, the natives in areas of South America have a Spanish name for the juvenile Andean condor because it looks so different than the adults that through early history, they thought it was a different species of bird. The zoo has had many Andean condors over the years, but before we started to breed California condors, and we continued to breed Andeans through the early years. In fact, we kept the paired Andeans at our East facility and bred them right alongside the California condors. The parent-reared Andean chicks would go on to be released in South America for the ongoing release program that Mike Wallace had spearheaded. Wallace spent 3 years in Peru developing release techniques for the species and in preparation for coming back to the States and leading the northern condor releases for California condors. These Andean pairs would be important foster rearers of California condor chicks in early years. The Andeans were eventually removed to make room for California pairs as the breeding program grew. At that time, we didn't even have enough pairs to fill both San Diego and LA facilities. That's how few birds there were. We also bred king vultures. And in 1990, Wallace thought it would be a good idea for the keepers to hand rear imprinted king vultures for practice before we took on the task of rearing California condors. The condors would have to be hand reared using a puppet and behind cumbersome cloth blinds and isolation from human contact to avoid imprinting, and it is very difficult to see and feel what you are doing with a puppet on one hand and a black cloth on the other hand and looking through a thick screen of shade cloth. And you're handling this tiny little thing with a cup trying to get it to eat out of it. It's very, 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 very tedious. So having the freedom from all these physical barriers from a live chick taught us a lot about the chick's anatomy and what to expect with California chicks we would be rearing. All the New World vulture species have similar chick behavior, so it was kind of a good comparison. The first king vulture chick we raised was a male named Cacique. And with the experience from my budding falconry pursuits, I ended up training him to be a tractable outreach bird for the zoo. Cacique went on to all the fundraisers and zoo parties and was a huge hit with people. That was Cacique before he was in full adult plumage. Cacique and I were together through my entire condor career. These pictures were taken 26 years apart. And I took the shot at my last day at the zoo of my little Cacique, and he's still there to this day. He's 35 years old, and I miss him already. Well, breeding season in 1990 came quickly, and the first eggs were produced that would be reared at the LA Zoo. In 1989, before I got there, a couple of eggs were produced, but those eggs were sent to San Diego for incubation as the program wasn't 100% confident in LA's ability to pull off incubation of this critically endangered bird. Until then, San Diego had handled all the field eggs that were pulled in and that. Wallace was not happy with this. He had assembled a brand new incubation facility and spent tens of thousands on incubators and other equipment. But thinking long game, instead of arguing his case, he agreed to send the eggs south. If anything bad happened to the first eggs we produced, our credibility would be tarnished. Better let it happen somewhere else. This only made him more determined than ever to have us successful and independent starting the next year with the 1990 breeding season. Every egg was so precious to the population. They were taken from the birds immediately after being laid for their safety. We could not afford any accidents. Getting the eggs to the safety of the incubators was definitely important. However, in hindsight, the way we did it was not done with the most finesse at the time, and it would show later on. Remember, this is artificial incubation. Birds clearly do it best, but again, we had to protect every egg like it was the last condor on Earth. Many, many bird breeders around the world try to build incubators that incubate eggs as well as birds do. No one can truly replicate natural incubation. The chicken industry stopped even trying to replicate natural incubation and just only breed chickens that hatched well in artificial incubation. A sort of reverse evolution, you might say. But for us, we were stuck, for now, adapting to what California Condor eggs responded best to hatch. California Condors have a 57-day incubation period, almost 2 months, one of the longest incubation periods in the bird world. We began to do daily candling to monitor the development of our eggs and make sure they are fertile and developing. Around day 8 is a window of opportunity to gather some important information. You can really see blood vessels and, more importantly, the embryo and its position relative to the large end. The normal position is head to the right, lying on its left side and in a 1 to 5 o'clock position. Can you guys see that in that left slide? So the sort of like red comma in the middle is the embryo, and you're looking at the right side of it, and it's the spine and then the head on the right. So anywhere from the 1 o'clock position to the 5 o'clock position, if that thing's pointing at anywhere there, we like that. If it's on the other side, it's likely to be upside down when it comes to hatch. I made this graphic to help train condor field biologists to age condor eggs that they didn't know the lay date of. If they didn't know the lay date, then they didn't know when the egg was due to hatch. If you don't know that, then you don't know when you would need to help it. It took a long time for us to accumulate all this information, but we could teach the important parts to a candling student from the field and get them guessing the age of our captive eggs with accuracy within just a couple of hours. At work, one person would candle and the other would take records. Every day we would have the person candling guessing the age of the egg because they weren't looking at the records. They were on another part of the room candling the egg and didn't know the age. Over time, we became really good at guessing the day of incubation. And in the early days of checking wild nests, this was a great thing to be able to do. Notice the air cell at the large end of the egg and how it grows as the days wear on. You can see the top of the egg on the day 8 egg. It's very small and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then after 40 days, the egg is basically just dark with this big bubble of air at the top. Any bird propagator knows that eggs ideally should lose about 15% of their original weight by the time they begin to hatch. They lose the weight through the evaporation of water through the pores of the eggshell. When an egg is laid, it's completely filled. There's no air bubbles anywhere. And over time, the water is replaced by air at the large end. High humidity, every egg loses weight at a different rate, so in order to control the weight loss, we would have multiple incubators kept at different humidities. High humidity for eggs that lost weight fast, and low humidity for eggs that lose weight slow. We control the humidity by adding and removing pans of water in the incubator. Eggs that were in the middle would play musical incubators and would move between the incubators throughout the incubation process. The last few years, I started to try and document the candling process by taking pictures of every egg every day. We had 20 eggs last year. iPhones are a remarkable tool for this. I assembled about 1,000 egg photographs and labeled them all per age. This will be shared with all members of the Condor program for a reference tool. Propagators already are familiar with these visuals, but they are very useful to field biologists who can just pull them up on their phone in a moment at a nest for reference. And it's just fun to look at for us. To all the field people that are here, if there are any more, I'm still working on it. I haven't sent it out yet. This is just the second half of incubation. On day 48 of 57, we pencil in the shape of that air cell every day, starting on day 48, because soon the air cell will begin to change dramatically. As you can, it doesn't change dramatically before day 48. It always happens on day 48, so we use 48 as a safety thing. As you can see, the progression of the air cell after day 48 is moderate at first, then jumps up on day 50, and more as the days wear on. This is called drawdown. And I'm supposed to describe how the birds draw down. So it starts out sort of like skin over like a skin on a drum. And as a chick gets bigger and right before it starts to hatch, it starts to push. Imagine pushing from underneath a drum. It's putting tension on that skin, and depending on its position, it'll drop down on one side, and it peels away the side and creates it shapes the airspace well. The way the air cell progresses gives us a lot of information about the position of the chick inside and is vital to its success exiting the next phase of life outside the egg, and tell us whether or not we need to intervene. You know, we have very few birds. They all have to hatch. There's no failure here. The chick must internally pip the air cell and begin breathing the air inside that space. So the first time the chick breathes air, it's that sort of bubble of air inside there that's not really connected to the outside. So it's just sort of practicing breathing, and it's really getting oxygen through the shell where all these blood vessels are all on the surface of the shell exchanging oxygen, carbon dioxide. This is the most critical time for us condor propagators to get it right. Any mistakes and the chick could die. An entire year's worth of work down the drain. Even today, when we have over 500 condors, we treat every egg like there's only 23 birds left in the world. Internal pip day is usually day 53. About 24 hours later, the chick should externally pip and break the shell for the first time and begins proper breathing of outside air. And from that point, once it's breathing outside air, it doesn't need all those membranes on the outside of its body. It starts pulling in all the blood, bringing in the yolk into its belly, and gets ready to start hatching. For most bird species, there is a specific position the chick needs to be in for it to hatch by itself. The optimal hatching position is head under right wing, like you see here, and head oriented towards the large end and the tail at the small end. Now imagine being in this situation. You are a gelatinous, wet, slimy blob cramped into this position inside a perfectly slick, slippery surface with no traction to push off of, with very little strength or endurance. But you got to get out. When the chick is ready to hatch, from this position, the chick uses a hatching muscle in its neck that is only present in the bird at this age. It's called the hatching muscle. The muscle is designed to punch the beak with its sharp egg tooth. I don't know if you can see the egg tooth on the tip of that bird's beak, on the top of it. And it pushes it against the shell, cracking it. Simultaneously, when the beak is engaged pushing a hole in the egg, its beak is temporarily anchored. So it's getting some traction there, right? It sticks its beak through the hole, sort of, and it holds it there. And it uses that anchor to push the head and rotate itself counterclockwise within the shell. Just a little bit, like 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. Now when the beak is retracted from that pipping action and the hole is made, its new resting position is about 1/4 inch off from the original hole. Then the chick repeats the process, punching and rotating, and executes a kind of can opener maneuver and pops the cap off the egg and is free. Simple. Seems easy, right? In 1996, we had an incredible year. 17 eggs, and we hatched 15 of them. However, we hadn't really improved our incubation parameters much yet, and we had a high number of malpositioned chicks. So if you're looking up there, the top left one is normal. The one on the right, 796, is head under left wing, and the beak is not in the air cell. It's on the far side of the air cell. 396 is head under left wing with a slouched neck. 1796 is really screwed up. It's upside down with its feet near the air cell. Now, anything other than that top left one, any of those other ones, without assistance would have probably died. There's 3 condors right there, gone. So, all of the maneuvers the chick has to execute can only really happen in the correct hatching position. In any other position, the mechanics don't work properly. Malpositioned chicks can easily die if they're not assisted. We cannot afford that, but to assist too early in the process, the chick could also die from our interventions. So timing and knowing position was critical. Good candling technique can be useful, but the egg is just black at this stage. Looking at a few fluttering shadows cannot always tell you what position the chick is in. Getting air to the chick is critical at this juncture. A manual air hole in the shell at the right moment can be life-saving. Making a hole in the wrong spot on the egg, however, could be disastrous, breaking external blood vessels or rupturing the yolk, among other lethal accidents. We can't afford that either. To be able to figure out what the position of these chicks was, we needed a better way than just candling. Radiographs. It wasn't easy at first, but we became very good at taking and interpreting x-rays of late-term eggs to determine the chick's position. Seems easy. It's not. If you're x-raying a dog's leg on a table, you know what leg you're taking a picture of. The contents of an egg is a mystery. Radiographs are mostly meant for detecting dense objects like bone and other material, not so much soft tissue. Baby birds in an egg are almost all soft tissue. The egg is made of calcium carbonate and is the densest thing in the picture. The bones are small and underdeveloped. The X-ray is also going through 2 layers of eggshell and decreasing the clarity of the picture. Also, the egg is round, so you can see how confusing it can be if you're looking for a specific place to start your air window. We solve this by taping a thin wire down on the surface of the egg. We can then take an X-ray, rotate the egg a turn, like 1/8 of a turn, and take another until we have 4 pictures with the wire in different positions. With this information, we can look at these 2-dimensional pictures and understand them in a 3-dimensional way. What we really care about is the beak tip and how we can access it to give the path of life-saving air. Eventually, we became so good at interpreting the radiographs on our own that the hospital and vet staff just took the pictures for us and sent us on our way with them. This egg is in big trouble. Now, you guys probably can't tell, but anybody can tell what he's doing? Here's the tip of his beak, and here's his back of his skull. Here's his eye socket and his nose. So he's upside down. The air cell's way at the top. So he was in big trouble. He wasn't going to hatch, and we had to do something. Now that the chick, we put a little air hole in there, made a path to his beak. There are some things you can do to look to see. We were able to start making holes in the eggs where we were so like almost surgical with it, where we could remove the shell without moving any membrane at all. And we're able to locate a nice clear spot that didn't have a bunch of vessels in it and get a hole in there. Now the chick has outside air through manual internal and external PIP. It can breathe, and we can breathe a sigh of relief. But it's not over yet. This chick will be on antibiotics for the next 7 days. The first of those 4 days, it will be in the egg still when we're medicating it. As long as the chick has transitioned to breathing outside air, all we have to do is wait a few days when we will know whether it will be able to hatch on its own or if we'll have to help it out. Why all this unnatural assistance? I get that question all the time. Well, they should be extinct if they can't hatch, right? This is artificial incubation. Artificial incubation is not perfect, and every species has their own specific incubation behavior. So you can't just take a exotic species like this and just go, oh, just use that technique and that'll work. It doesn't work that way. Condors, by the way, have been documented many times in captivity and in the wild, assisting their chicks to hatch. So this really is not that unnatural for the species in reality. Now this is what we would rather see, a self-hatched chick with no problems. As time went on, we used what we learned from high volume of egg incubation experience to shape our parameters from the Andean Condor protocols to a more California Condor specific incubation protocol. Higher temperature and higher weight loss from Andean condors was what was ultimately needed. In a nutshell, that's what we did. We had higher temperatures and higher weight loss. We also stopped handling the eggs so much, only handling them 2 or 3 times a week, and the same with weighing them. We didn't want our actions to be part of any possible problem. We wanted success because that's what mattered. We took copious notes and records for each individual egg and its journey to a live chick or a dead one. We learned a lot. We kept on trying to improve our incubation protocols, and we still do that right up to the present. With this fine-tuning of incubation parameters, we saw much fewer instances of malposition, more self-hatches and earlier hatches, and shorter incubation times as the years passed. One of the latest adjustments we incorporated into our incubation routine is called thermoshock therapy. Some bird species deliberately cool their eggs during certain parts of the incubation period. Historically, the only time our eggs were cooled at all was for a few minutes when they were weighed and candled. My partner at the zoo, Chandra David, does work with bearded vultures in Spain every year, helping a similar vulture project, helping with nest entries and incubation. And a man she met there was doing thermoshock treatment on his vulture eggs, putting the eggs up on the windowsill and letting the cold mountain air wash over them for 20 or 30 minutes a couple times a day, kind of like cooling a pie, right? This simple action increased his successful hatch rate by a lot. We decided to adopt this technique as well. We noticed our birds leaving their eggs for 30 minutes to an hour or so in the beginning of incubation process as well. We incubate condor eggs at around 98.5 degrees Fahrenheit. The incubation rooms are kept at about 70 degrees. We put all our eggs in a bowl and let them sit on in the cold draft of the air conditioner 2 times a day for 20 minutes. When you pick those eggs up, they feel cold. When you pick them out of the incubator, they're very warm. We saw better overall weight loss, more self-hatches, and stronger chicks from this simple technique. We were only doing it about 3 years. Let's see. The first of many chicks produced in LA were all hand-reared using puppets to avoid human imprinting. This is tedious work. Condor chicks have a 5.5-month nestling period, feeding them multiple times every day for 5 months. When you have a couple, it's okay. When you have hatched 15 and they all need feeding and cleaning several times a day, it's a bit much. We had to hand rear them because we couldn't be sure the parents would rear them safely in captivity. Remember, we had very few birds. It had never been done with the species, and we had less than 40 in the entire world. Everyone was priceless. Every egg was swiped from the parents within minutes of being laid, lest the egg be broken. This bum rushing of the nest box routine every time an egg was laid made sure every egg was safe in the incubator, but it also took a real toll on our breeding pairs and actually had the opposite effect over time. Their resentment to our intrusions in their nests created mistrust of us and long-term aggression issues between the birds themselves. Without having anyone to exert their territoriality on, because we'd, grab the egg and run, they turned on each other. Eggs were broken, some chicks were killed because of this urgency of getting every egg to safety as soon as possible. We began being much more sensitive to the birds' obvious sense of resentment to intrusion in their nest box. We installed portals all around the outside of the nest box where we could secretly reach in and pull the eggs without the birds knowing we were there anywhere nearby. During the breeding season, we tried to never be caught anywhere near the nest box. Over time, this had a very calming effect on the adults. We began to let them incubate dummy eggs. We watched to see how they cooperated with their nest exchanges. With the ultimate goal of having the birds parent-rear chicks, we began by allowing them to rear less critically endangered species of chick, like Andean condors and king vultures. The criteria for a pair to be able to rear a California chick was for them to successfully rear an Andean or king vulture chick first. This is called cross-fostering. When birds had the opportunity to foster chicks, the next year they were all business, and we were able to get just about every pair to start rearing California Condor chicks. Using our treatment of sanctuary as it related to the nest box, we saw vast improvements in pair bonding and overall happiness in the pairs. Eventually, we rehabilitated all of our pairs, even the ones who previously argued, fought, and broke eggs and killed chicks, to the point where every pair could be trusted rearing chicks. Even Topa got into the act. In fact, he became one of our most trusted adult males for rearing. And when we would place an egg, we would just set the egg in the nest box and go to lunch. We didn't even think about it. Hand rearing, again, is very labor intensive. Food prep in the original protocols was very tedious. It called for birds to be fed skinned mice, skinned rats, and other items that were chopped up. With every hatching, a 24-hour coverage was in effect. 3 days before hatch to monitor the egg, and 3 days after hatch to take care of the chick, 24 hours a day. Now imagine you had a chick hatch the beginning of the week, so you had 3 days of 24 hours, the hatch, and 3 days, and the next chick hatched. And they were all in succession. You'd have these 24-hour watches for sometimes a month. The person doing the night shift was generally feeding chicks and prepping food for the keepers on the day shift. When doing an overnight shift, I would typically skin about 500 mice a night. And it would have to be done again the next night. Condor chicks don't fledge until about 5.5 months of age. All that food they ate had to go somewhere, and there was a lot of laundry and cleaning to do as well. Over time, we felt there was a lot of waste going on with the protocols we had. We would try to implement improvements, but since Wallace has left to San Diego and wasn't at the zoo anymore, the current supervisors were way too conservative and afraid to change anything. Once the cards were shuffled and the administration changed again, we became free to improve the efficiency of the process. And that we did. Knowing what we knew from years of raising chicks and their metabolism, we were able to cut feedings down to 2 feedings a day by the age of 3 weeks. We went from feeding chopped, skinned baby food to the chicks for 4 to 5 months to having them on an adult diet, feeding themselves by 60 days. That's about 500 grams of food a day, processed all on their own. Tearing whole rats, big chunks of meat that they had to sit there and tear that all to feed themselves. It also gave them something to do all day. We went from pounds of wasted food to almost none. We adjusted each chick's diet as they consumed it. If they wasted any, they got less the next day until we found the particular chick's requirements. To prepare chicks for the first releases in 1992, it was thought that we needed to socialize the chicks to make them a more cohesive group. Condor chicks are very friendly, and this was not a problem. As you can see here, the chicks were introduced as downy nestlings, and they would spend all day dogpiling on each other and allopreening. This worked well with the Andean condor releases in South America, and this program was, of course, modeled after the Andean releases. In California, however, there were no wild birds left. They were all in captivity. In South America, there was still a wild population. The chicks released were sort of merged into a wild flocks and did very well. In California, there was a void of any social structure in the wild. We started to have behavioral problems in the birds that were released pretty much right away. Birds were landing on structures and taking handouts from onlookers, among other things, like landing on cross arms of power poles and getting electrocuted. It was time to reboot. After a couple years of this, all of the released birds were returned to captivity. The regular use of power poles as perches was the deal breaker, and was being taught to new released birds, and it threatened the safety of all of the birds if it became normal. Wallace got us some real utility poles from California Edison with a 10-foot cross arms, and we erected them inside the pre-release cages and fixed the surface of them with an electric fence wire. He made me test the wire. If a bird landed on the pole, it was shocked. This worked almost 100% and for the most part cured the regular use of wooden power pole use in the future releases for many years. And now every release site is equipped with these mock power poles, or what we call e-perch, the electric perch, as we call it. Many more improvements in the preparation of the release birds were implemented over the years. Some of the more meaningful changes we made were raising chicks alone, like a regular chick would in the nest. Releasing at the age of almost 2 years instead of transferring them to the field at 3 months, waiting for them to get to 6 months and then just abandoning them. We didn't know any better. Chicks weren't introduced to each other until they were already introduced to an adult mentor for months first. These simple changes made a world of difference in the behavior of all release candidates. Every individual bird was evaluated for their fitness for release. Some birds just didn't seem ready as soon as others. We removed any arbitrary dates that would hinder success, like we're going to ship the birds on November 1st. No, we're going to ship the birds when they're ready. It's a big, big, big difference. So no arbitrary dates or goals like that. We removed any, okay. If a bird didn't seem confident enough to be released, we would just simply hold them back a year because we're going to have a whole other group of birds to release next year and maybe even the year after that if he didn't seem socially right. We weren't just a condor factory. We wanted success for these birds. All of these improvements in preparation of the release candidates were developed by myself and my crew. We were usually the recipients of the failed release birds because of our proximity to the field. So no matter where they came from, they always came back to us if they were like a pain in the butt in the field. So we were kind of getting punished for whatever was happening. Let's see. Nevertheless, our partners in the field deserve the best product from the captive partners. So we felt obligated to do our part for this program and give them the best wild, healthy, socialized release candidates we could produce. It had everything to do with our field partners' daily life, if the birds were easy to release or were a problem for them. We did not want to be seen as a problem for them. We started to see breeding behavior in the wild around 2000. But there was a lack of success of fledges. Most of the chicks from the first dozen nesting attempts ended up dead because of impaction from microtrash. Condors can readily digest bone. Condors' parents search out and consume bones where they can find them to supplement the naturally calcium deficient diet they are feeding to their grown chicks. Large ungulates, condors' favorite food, and what they evolved eating, have very few, if any, bones that can be consumed other than a handful of carpal bones in the wrists of these big ungulates, if they can even find them. It turns out that the search technique appears to be tactile. It's not from looking at it. They see something, they pick it up, and they feel if it feels right. If it feels right, they swallow it. So they can be easily fooled. Whether they can find bones or not, they will exhibit the behavior of looking for bones. They were mistaking little bits of trash of all kinds and bringing it back to the chicks and feeding it to them. A couple days before a female condor lays an egg, you can find her scouring the floor of her cage, searching for and consuming bone fragments. A California condor egg is big, about the size of but not as tasty as an avocado. Since condors can digest bone well, this aids the female in laying down the calcium to make the eggshell. During the breeding season, we saw this all the time. Birds would gather bones and water and feed it directly to the chicks without even any food. Here is a condor number 33, Sequoia, doing just that. In the wild, the birds could get confused as to what was bones and what wasn't. So he's just there feeding bones. This was not unique to the reintroduced condors in California. This is a historic picture of a bird at Pyramid Lake picking up some trash and playing with it. Historic nests were sifted and were found to contain similar bits of trash way before the original birds were trapped up. And these are things found in Hopper Canyon somewhere before the release program. Due to the trash issue, a nest guarding program was initiated. My team at the zoo became heavily involved in this field program. In fact, we helped design it, entering condor nests at regular intervals to check the health of chicks and collect data. Some thought this was an intrusion. This intrusion was too reckless and chicks would be killed or injured because of the handling. But this was our wheelhouse. Handling chicks was the stuff we did all the time, so we were happy to participate and advise as to the safety of handling condor chicks. Young chicks are delicate to be sure, and it takes great care to do it right without injuring them. And they get harder to handle as they get older and far more combative, yet they are still quite delicate. Their talons at this age are just needles and can bite pretty good too. To be able to assist with the nest entries, we had to learn how to rope into these places and went through annual training with Joseph Brandt with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Alicia and Gavin at National Park Service. And every year we would go refresher training, refresher training, refresher training. We'd go over to Topanga Park where those big rocks are. We would climb all day. Learning these skills and having these experiences was as thrilling as it was important to the recovery of the species, and we always jumped at the opportunity to join our friends and enter nests no matter how precarious the climb was or how the hike was a slog. Carrying a heavy backpack full of nest gear, we often called these hikes death marches. Now imagine hanging off a 200-foot cliff and having to deal with this. Or asking a field biologist with no experience to have to deal with this delicate yet very combative older chick while hanging off a rope 200 feet off the ground. Just like our partners in the field taught us to safely rope into the nests, we would have yearly chick handling training. Using our captive bred chicks, we would do mock nest entries in this controlled environment, getting as many people as possible good at safe condor chick handling as we could. We could literally run staff through a realistic nest entry of handling, hooding, pulling blood, giving vaccinations, checking for trash with a metal detector, and weighing, using multiple chicks 5-6 times in one day, minus the climbing. Getting months of field experience of hands-on training in a single morning that could take weeks to complete, if not years. What would Wallace do? Train people like you're leaving in a year. Don't take all that skill with you. We also held egg handling and candling training for any field personnel who wanted it. Our door was always open to anyone in the program. As far as we were concerned, we were all one team, and it was just another opportunity to hang out with our friends and teammates. You guys know that nest? Anyone? Pole Canyon? 2005. Some chicks were so far gone with trash they had to be evacuated by a helicopter right to the zoo parking lot and taken to the zoo hospital where? Immediate surgery to remove this trash. And then fly them back to the nest the next day. Pretty amazing operation. Almost every chick we did abdominal surgery on and returned to the nest ended up fledging. Shout out to Dr. Klaus at the zoo. In 2004, a chick was seen outside its nest cave with a broken wing. I went on this rescue mission to bring this bird back to the zoo. An unbelievable rescue story where we were really lucky to have survived. But we got him to the zoo, albeit with a few more gray hairs than when we started. Our amazing orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Stephen Klaus, repaired the wing, and we finished rearing the chick this time at the zoo instead of putting it back in the nest because he had his cast. And to this date, the chick had most trash of any chick we ever handled, including 28 bottle caps and probably 150 other items. Months of physical therapy, stretching the injured wing on this poor bird. He had pins and external fixators and was in a lot of pain during this physical therapy. After he was fully grown and all the pins were taken out, we kept him in isolation for a few years in a huge flight cage with other birds to socialize, with hopes his wing would function good enough for release back to the wild. We named him Jeffrey. He was released a few years later and did great, and is still out there. And you may recognize him as Condor 328. That's him. You guys ever remember that old Bill Cosby comedy thing, the real old one where he's talking about the kid in first class, always going over the seats and everybody bugging everybody, and it was all Jeffrey this, Jeffrey that, Jeffrey that. And the mother was saying Jeffrey, Jeffrey that. Well, that's where we got his name from, because when we were handling him all the time, he hated us so much that he would just fuss constantly. We saw Jeffrey this and Jeffrey that. That's how, if anybody needed to know how he got his name. We regularly came out to the field for processing birds at biannual trapping events. All this collaboration with our partners was very good for morale and team building for the whole program. Many lifelong friendships were made during these times. Again, all this together for a common cause. With all this going on in the field, we were still at the zoo every day trying to make as many chicks for our partners to release as possible, learning new tricks and trying to advance the understanding of and husbandry of this species, and advance the California Condor aviculture envelope as far as it could be pushed. We were writing the book, and we cared what went into the pages. Occasionally, it is necessary to break up a successful pair and make new pairs with the birds. All the genetics of the flock are analyzed annually. Each male is matched up with each female on paper in the captive program. All of those theoretic pairings are given a score from 0 to 6, 0 being most beneficial to the population and 6 being least beneficial or detrimental to the genetic population and the health of the world flock. From these analyses, the best new pairs are chosen. At LA, we were very focused on production. Wallace always taught us that numbers equal time. The more birds you have, the more time you have to fix things for the birds in the environment or whatever needed to recover the species. So when we were compelled to break up pairs, we were always very wary of lack of production of new pairs. And we wanted to get them online producing as soon as possible. By the way, we hated this part of our job. Breaking up loving pairs who had been together for decades was very difficult for us. And they were like, like Brangelina. Like, you had these pairs that you love them because of how they behaved, and, you can't be around them every day, you can't help but like them. Again, new California Condor pairs are unpredictable. The old school way of introducing two adults that you hoped would breed was to get them in their new home as early in the year, or the year before, as possible, to allow them to adjust to each other. The problem was, not all birds are immediately compatible. Breeding age birds are territorial of their flight cages. Strange new additions aren't always welcome, and some birds fought right away and start off on the wrong foot, having to make up all that lost time when breeding season rolled around. They wanted to get together, but they just don't trust each other anymore because of their shaky, violent past from a few months of fighting. The males would display and court the females, but they were so afraid of the males because they just spent 6 months running away from them. Some pairs took years to get together or just never could get along enough, and those pairs had to be abandoned, and we would have to start over, wasting years on a coveted breeding slot in a facility that could have been producing chicks for release. This was very frustrating to us, and we wanted to avoid any breeding slots not being utilized for production every year. We followed all the wild pairs like paparazzi, and we noticed how some pairs in the wild weren't always so monogamous from year to year. There were more naturally occurring breakups and repairings than you would expect from this mate-for-life species. Was it from the physical health of the entire wild population, from the almost constant exposure to lead, or was this normal? The biologists of the 80s couldn't know. They had so few birds to study, and they were so spread out far apart towards the end. Reports from the current field program showed new pairs forming that may not have even been suspected, and happening very quickly. One year in the late 90s, we were keeping a male and female together, and we had no expectations of them breeding when all of a sudden they were copulating. We didn't even think they liked each other. It happened within a few months of introduction, and this was sort of unheard of in the captive program. Most of the time it took a year or more to bond a pair, and so we just expected it to take a year or more. I started thinking about the wild pairs more and how it all worked. How could we capitalize on what allowed wild birds to pair and breed seemingly so spontaneously? The obvious difference from captivity to the wild was the element of competition and freedom of choice. There being sort of these arranged marriages. Nobody likes that, right? But if we put more than 2 birds in a cage together, we couldn't control who bred with who, or could we? We tried by putting a new pair in a cage, but also putting in several non-breeding aged birds, giving the pair a sort of illusion of choice. There's lots of birds in there, so they eventually gravitated towards one another because they were the most attractive of the group. And the cutest girl in the party is the cutest one until the cuter one walks in, right? So there's the cutest girl in the party. That worked most of the time, but it also took time to accomplish. Also, once they decided to pair bond, it was very subtle. but a switch would go off and they abruptly decided that all the other birds weren't welcome, and they would team up and become very aggressive towards the others, and we would have to scramble and get them out. Not every one of those birds escaped unscathed. I thought back on my game bird and pigeon breeding experience. Many racing pigeon breeders separate all their male and female birds for months at a time and reunite them all in other months of the year and get really good production that way. There is this urgency about the pairings. Everyone is scrambling to pair up with somebody else before there's no one left. I think condors in the wild go through a similar experience as the breeding season looms. Becoming part of a breeding pair is a step up in hierarchy for a single bird. So there's lots of reasons to breed, not just because you want to breed, because you become a higher ranking bird in the social hierarchy. So we set out to try and replicate some of these conditions in captivity to see if we could speed up the pairing process. When a new pairing was recommended, we tried to get the female to our facility as soon as possible. We set her up in the pen we wanted her to breed in, and we kept the male away and out of sight. Condors set up contextual territoriality in their cages very quickly, particularly males. Anything within the wire of their cage, they defend from any strange birds. Females are a bit more fearful and subordinate by nature, but they will become territorial over time. Placing a strange female into a territorial male's cage at the wrong time of the year is just a recipe for conflict. The female being chased and traumatized and wish she was anywhere but living with this big monster. In the non-breeding season, the birds have no real interest in each other and only see each other as competitors if they don't know each other. So putting them together when they don't know each other in the off-season, this is just a strange, I have no interest in you until I have hormones, and then I might be interested. But I already hate you, so. This can get a pair to harbor somewhat permanent animosity towards each other from the very beginning of the introduction. They may breed together over time, but they may also fight over incubation and chick care duties, which can be dangerous to eggs and chicks. To get away from all this, what we considered unnecessary conflict, we set up the new female in the cage to allow her to live there alone for a month or two before the height of the breeding season. Right up into the height of breeding season. So you're talking about a Hail Mary here. The lack of any competition in her personal space and never being challenged for perches or food or water or nest box resources builds her ego very quickly because she's not being challenged. She goes from meek and shy in her new digs to challenging the birds next door in just a month or so, strutting around inflated and trying to break up birds breeding next door. Breeding season is in session, and the birds in cages on both sides of her are house hunting and doing courtship displays and copulating already. She is very affected by all this breeding activity and getting more and more excited as the weeks wear on. Meanwhile, her potential mate has been sequestered in a holding area. He is also affected by the time of year with the photoperiod, and his hormones are at their peak. It is way too late in the breeding season that would be considered a time to introduce a pair traditionally, or so we previously thought. Once we feel that the new female has claimed meaningful ownership of this flight pen, it's time to introduce the male to the equation. Remember, breeding season is in full swing. Other pairs may have already produced eggs already. Instead of just letting the male in and see what happens, we structure the introduction. He is placed in a small adjacent cage that has a door that can be opened remotely. Just the disruption of us physically putting him into this cage can throw the sensitive female off for a bit, and she may cower in a far side of the cage for a while. But given time, she resents the presence of this intruding bird in her territory and begins to approach him from the outside. Her posture as she approaches him is what we're looking for, confident and territorial, strutting up to the male, challenging his presence there. Now, I've been around condors most of my life, and there's one thing a dominant male condor hopped up on hormones can't resist, and it's a confident, dominant female. We wait for the right moment. The birds are vocalizing and woofing at each other, pressing up against the wire, just trying to get at each other. This is exactly what we're looking for. The door is slowly opened remotely, and the male is allowed to walk gracefully out into the pen. The female approaches him. Both birds are way past the courtship part of breeding season, way past it. It's like both of their brains are saying, target image acquired. In almost every instance we use this technique, the same routine unfolded. The male walks directly to the nest box and enters it, followed by the female. This single behavior of nest hunting is an advanced stage of courtship for condors. No female in their right mind would enter into closed space with a strange adult male condor lest she get trapped in there and beaten up by him. But she does. While both are in the nest box, the male will display. The female will appear interested and may even let him mount her for a second. Now, as I've said, getting birds to this stage of breeding in the past could take years, and we have just done it in under 5 minutes. In every case using this technique, we got breeding the very first season we tried. And the absolute record was a fertile egg within 30 days of introduction and a live chick within 90 days of introduction. To breeders, that's like a big deal. The pairs introduced this way are more compatible, friendlier, and loving with each other than the birds paired traditional way. They are friendly with each other, even in the non-breeding season. And they are much, much happier and willing to breed all the following seasons. Almost no fighting between them ever. As we know, condors only lay 1 egg per nesting attempt and therefore only raise a single chick per nesting cycle. This cycle can carry over into the next breeding season and prevent the pair from breeding. Obviously, captive birds breed every single year and they have sometimes several eggs a year. So the whole breeding every other year thing is purely the dependence of the chick that causes that. And to be honest, the females would rather see that chick beat it so she can breed again. Carrion is not a predictable food source, and it's thought that this may be a resource issue that a single chick brood was selected for in the evolution of the species. In captivity, we take all the first eggs laid. This induces the pair to lay a replacement egg, doubling the production per year of each pair. In fact, we call it double clutching. Raising chicks by hand is a lot of hard work and is resource heavy, like I said before. Nowadays, we try to do as little hand rearing as possible. But if condors can produce 2 eggs and only raise 1 chick, what happens to the other chick? With budget cuts and less staff than in the past, we do everything to try to get chicks parent reared as we can. From placing eggs in wild nests that failed, to shipping eggs to other facilities that have birds available to rear, we try and get every adult bird who is capable of rearing at every facility. Almost no California condors are hand reared anymore, anywhere. Again, in my opinion, every bird in the population should be employed doing something to recover the species. If I know anything about condors, it's that they're never happier than when they have a little downy chick under them. They live to raise babies. It is so fulfilling to them and gives them something to do in captivity. I always felt sorry for the pairs that didn't get to rear some years and watch their neighbors going in and out of the nest box to feed their babies. These parents are so enthusiastic for their duties. In the wild, they fly far and wide looking for resources to raise their chicks. In captivity, they have so many resources just outside their nest box: food, water, proximity to everything. It seems like they could be doing more. We always wondered if they could rear more than 1 at a time in captivity. Turkey vultures, this is a turkey vulture babies. Turkey vultures and black vultures have multiple chicks in their nests and do just fine. The nesting behavior of the different species of New World vultures is very similar, and chicks act much like condor chicks do. Was there some distant time in the condor's evolution where they had more than 1 chick? Could we harness any residual natural history deep inside their brains? In 2017, we had more chicks than parents, and we were on the verge of having to hand rear. Oh no. I had been training a female condor for outreach, and this bird had pair bonded with me, as captive birds do. She was over 30 years old and had bred for many years and raised many chicks with her past mate before being broken up for genetic reasons, and there were no plans to repair her. I spent lots of time with her, and I had encouraged her to lay an egg so that she would be in the right state of mind to rear a chick on her own, which has become common in captive settings now. She had received her chick, all was well, and we suddenly had a similar age chick with no one to rear it. we took a chance and introduced this additional chick to her and the other one. The adult hen didn't seem to notice there were two chicks. Well, partly because she only had one eye. But it didn't seem to bother her, and she reared both of them with me there to mediate if anything went wrong. Unlike other birds who would resent a human's presence in the nest, I was welcomed by her, and she often felt relieved and would take a break from duties when I would show up. Must have been a bit overwhelming for her to have two chicks and only one eye. That was the first of what we ended up calling a double brood. The next breeding season was 2018, and we tried creating a double brood with an actual pair of birds because we were so encouraged by that single female doing it so easily. It went over perfect. And the two birds taking care of two chicks, and with two birds and all those resources, it was easy for them to raise two chicks. Those chicks were released. We kept on expanding the idea every year. Some years we would have more double broods than single broods. This single method has become an invaluable husbandry tool for us. As I said before, hen rearing is an extremely resource-intensive task. Human resource and food resources. Parent rearing solves the human resource part of it. What about the food? According to the zoo, condors are the most expensive animal in the zoo to feed. Is that right, Mike? Double brooding not only is less human resource intensive, it also is cheaper to feed one pair and two babies than two pairs with one baby each. Doing the math of how much less food we used, we figured we were saving the zoo about $3,000 in rats per year for every double brood we completed. Between 2017 and 2025, we have completed 22 double broods and 2 triple broods for a total savings of rats alone of $72,000 in 8 years. Now, where has all this gotten us? As the end of 2024, the world population of California condors is 566 at the end of 2024. Now, we're all familiar with the tags the birds wear, but what do they mean? Whenever a chick hatches, it is assigned an international stud book number. Most species survival programs assign these numbers to individuals, especially endangered ones. When I started in 1989, the highest stud book number was 48. In 2024, the highest stud book number was around 1,316. We've come a long way since '92 and the first reintroduction of birds to the wild. We've learned a lot about what to do, what not to do. This 12-year bar graph from our fearless leader, Mr. Steve Kirkland of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, shows the colors. The green bar, if you can see it, is California released, meaning captive bred birds that were released to the wild on those years. The blue bar are birds that naturally fledged from wild nests. And the dark bar are how many birds died that year in the wild. And this is all in California. Now, what's wrong with that bar graph? What? 2020, there was the Dolan fire in Big Sur and killed like 20 birds in one night. So that's not really a great. And then this is just California. Arizona had an outbreak of HPAI and killed about 21 birds in 2 weeks. So there are these catastrophes, and that's why we have different release sites, different breeding sites. All the genetics of everybody are spread equally of every site, including the release sites. So if there's a catastrophe in 5 places, we still have one place with all the same genetics that we can rebuild from. Here's an easier bar graph to look at. These are clusters of 3 years at a time. 197 captive birds, 369 wild birds. How is it that 197 birds in captivity are producing almost 3 times the chicks that 369 birds are producing in the wild? Double clutching explains part of it because we have more eggs per year per pair. And younger birds in the wild explains some more. But there's close to twice as many birds in the wild as there are captive, right? Something's not right. In 2022, there was 564 birds. In 2023, there was 561 birds. In the wild, there was, in 22 was 350 birds, and 23 is 344 birds. The newest chicks stud book numbers now are, by the way, is 1,378 this year. Known causes of mortality in the free-ranging condor population from 1992, when we first released them, to 24. 539 deaths in the wild between 1992 and 2024. 308 known causes of death in the wild. 231 unknown causes. 50% or 151 of the known causes of death were from lead poisoning, from spent ammunition. 157 known causes of death that weren't lead poisoning, and you can see all the different ways they died. 231 unknown. Birds they die in very far places, and they're very hard to catch, and a lot of times it's in the summer, so a bird dies, and just 10 hours later it's worthless for a necropsy and baking in the sun. So a lot of these are birds that just died and didn't know. 231 unknown. Well, I think by looking at this stunningly informative pie chart, you can get a feeling of what the cause of death might have been for 50% of those 231 unknown dead birds. I think it's a fair yet unscientific, educated guess. I didn't really touch on the lead poisoning part of our experience in this program, and it is a long and intense one. It would take up another hour or two, and it would be an hour of sour negativity. And it's not really part of the condor breeding subject, so I left it out. For many years, the LA Zoo was the only hospital taking in all the lead cases that were found in the wild flock in California. At one time, it was a fairly constant stream of lead-exposed birds being dropped off to be treated. At one point, we were treating 22 wild birds at the same time. But if you want the short version of that story, imagine this. Experiencing having a California condor chick hatch right in your hands, watching it being parent-reared on video camera and fledging in captivity. And then we keep it in isolation for almost 2 years, giving time to mature and socialize, catching it up and sending it out to the field, seeing it released to the wild, maybe handling it again at a trap-up event a couple of years later, and maybe a couple of years later, maybe even seeing it as an adult in the wild, maybe on a nest entry when you came to check on the health of its own chick. Right? Pretty good history with that bird. Then seeing it being dropped off at the zoo and looks like this for a month as it slowly declines and decays. And no matter how hard you try to save it, it finally succumbs and dies in your hands, just like it hatched. I don't care to mention how many times that happened to me. The condors need less of this and more of this. The condors need less of this and more of this. Captive breeding is the lifeblood of this recovery program. Without captive breeding, there is no program. You saw the bar graphs. The numbers don't lie. The green bar, that's the lifeblood of the thing. Some of the models from Myra Finkelstein said, if we stopped releasing birds right now, with all those birds in the wild, they'd be extinct in 20 years. So, captive breeding is essential. By now you probably can tell I'm passionate about breeding condors. Have I sufficiently exhibited that today? Every year, the breeding center all breeding centers in the U.S. produce about 50 chicks combined, and most of those chicks go on to be released to the wild. A few birds a year are produced that are genetically valuable enough to keep in captivity to make new future pairs with. Usually, we send them to a zoo like Santa Barbara to be put on exhibit until they are old enough to be bred, because we can't keep them all. I mean, we would be overrun. Although reared along with the others as though they would be released, birds that were prepared for the wild are often so fearful that they become a management issue when it comes to a life of breeding in captivity. So spending 5 years or so on exhibit can get them more accustomed to human exposure and make managing them smoother, and they have a happier life that way. We are at a point in this program where we are faced with almost every breeding chamber at every breeding center is at capacity. Some facilities have expanded and are already full. Some centers like LA and San Diego have no plans to expand and no room to do it if we wanted to. Some breeding age birds are sitting in holdings somewhere without a mate. Again, I repeat, I have the opinion that every bird that is capable should be contributing to the recovery of the species. There should be no downtime. Exhibits are great, they provide education to the public, but if birds are capable of rearing chicks, that's how they should be employed. I've been in the program meetings. We end up with the same conclusion. We need more breeding space. If we're going to get ahead of this mortality problem with lead and grow the population, the numbers don't lie. We need to release more birds. Some of my colleagues and I in the program have already retired from their places of work, like Chandra, Mike Maxey, and myself. You can turn that back off. I'm not done, sorry. It's just a dark slide, note. We've all retired or on the verge of it, but we all have the same passion for this bird, for this program. We all agree, we can't stop now. And that's why I'm very excited and nervous to reveal today, for the very first time, the California Condor Alliance. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization with tax-free status with IRS and Franchise Tax Board. Active since July 24 by a dedicated board of officers and directors meeting on a quarterly basis. Mike Maxey over there happens to be one of them. And currently in the planning and program development phases, establishing foundational goals and infrastructure. Our mission, drawing on deep expertise in condor propagation, the California Condor Alliance is dedicated to advancing innovative captive breeding solutions, creating a vital new resource to significantly increase the California condor population and support its enduring legacy in the wild. Our vision, a future where the California condor, an icon of the rugged West, is no longer endangered but flourishes in the wild, from its historic heartland in California and beyond, a permanent and celebrated part of North America's natural legacy. Our ambition for the California Condor Alliance to be a thriving breeding center for condors and a vital partner in the California Condor Recovery Program. We aspire to provide a number of healthy young condors for release annually to strengthen wild populations, advance the timeline for full species recovery at this critical moment in conservation history. And with that, I'll take any questions you have. I'm sorry it took an hour and 15 minutes to get through that, but